worked with Larry Leon Hamlin as special assistant to the and producer for the National Black Theater Festival in Winston-Salem. And if you've ever gone, it is a magnificent festival wherein theater lovers from all over the nation and actually the world come and perform and watch observations. There's Mr. Herman Laverne Jones. We're just reading your bio. And Jones also worked with many celebrities over the years. He's currently the CEO of Theater South Atlanta, and he operates in Miami, Florida. They're at Florida Memorial University in North Miami, Florida. No, Miami Gardens, Florida. Good to see you, Herman Laverne Jones. We're awaiting your audio. We're also being joined today by Mrs. Deborah Alt. She's our second reader, Dr. Harris, and Miss Deborah Alt. I want to make sure I say the name correctly. I'm pleased to introduce to you Mrs. Alt, who is an undergraduate student at Brandeis University, and she's double majoring in educational studies and in business. And while she's there at Brandeis, she's undertaken a plethora of leadership roles, but some of the most significant ones include being the co-president of the organization named Brandeis Bridges, which helped to forge relationships between Black and Jewish students, because Brandeis is a traditionally Jewish institution. It's also an institution that Angela Davis attended. And also while there, she has co-authored an initiative named the Black Action Plan, which started out as a 25-page list of demands, but has transformed into a platform to dismantle systemic racism at Brandeis University through transformative conversations and high accountability. Deborah is a Brandeis Junior Alumni Board representative, and she's also an honorary student board of trustee member. It's my honor to present to you Deborah Alt, as well as Mr. Herman Laverne Jones, who will begin our reading for the day. Welcome, Deborah Alt. Good to see you. So I'm going to turn myself on mute. Following protocol, we'll listen to Herman Laverne Jones, and then we will continue the conversation with each speaker putting themselves on mute so we eliminate the echo effect. Mr. Jones, please begin.
This is Dr. Herbert Harrison. While Herman is looking at his the technical issue, the idea of this is our 7th day of reading, and the reason that we wanted to do this reading of the Solving the Race Issue in America was because the issue has become so profound now that it has really penetrated every level of our country, every level of existence. It's in the politics, it's in the social discourse, it's in the financial community. And the reason is because it is just that powerful. The issue of racism has been alive and well in our country for so long that it has created a vibration now that is exploding. For quite some time after the election, before the election of President Barack Obama, there was a good sense that it was under the cover. I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and once the civil rights movement took place, many of the Ku Klux Klan, that whole white supremacist era, basically went underground. It did not disappear, but it was just underground. And what has happened in the last 4 years is the leadership of the country has really created that vibration again of racism, of white supremacy. And it has resonated through that group of undercover folks, so that we're now hearing it in full bloom and in full blast. And so this is one of the reasons we did this reading. And now I think, Herman, you may be ready to continue.
Sports. White Americans have systematically kept Black American athletes from competing in the sports arena so that white athletes could always appear to be the best in their particular sport. Let's consider professional boxing. For many years after the end of the Civil War, Black boxers were not permitted to box white boxers. The implication was that a black man was not skilled or intelligent enough to defeat a white boxer. In addition, there was a feeling in America that giving a black American a chance at the heavyweight title would be too costly and might offset the moral balance of American society. The way to ensure this myth of white superiority was to bar black boxers from participating in title fights. In reality, many black boxers were far superior to white boxers, but were never given the chance to compete. The racism was so strong in America that a black boxer could not even fight a white boxer on American soil. Jim Jeffries, white heavyweight champion in the early 1900s, refused to fight famous American fighter Jack Johnson circa 1878 to 1946 because he was black. White America could not stomach that thought, vision, and symbolism of a black man physically beating a white man and drawing blood. This symbolism was at total odds with the paradigm of slavery. To get a title fight, Jack Johnson had to go to Sydney, Australia to fight Tommy Burns, the Canadian heavyweight champion, in 1908. Johnson defeated Burns and became the world heavyweight champion. America refused to recognize Jack Johnson as heavyweight champion, and there began a desperate search for the great white hope to whip this black man and put him in his place as a second-rate, inferior boxer who was no match for a skilled white boxer. In addition to the vindication of white manhood, follow the money, a lot of money could be made on a fight to teach this black American his place in life. Jack Johnson became the official heavyweight champion of the world on July 4th, 1910 in Las Vegas, Nevada, when he defeated Jim Jeffries, retired white heavyweight champion. Jeffries was the first of many great white hopes. Johnson's victory over the great white hope sparked race riots and violence against Black Americans by angry white Americans. The Texas state legislature banned films showing Jack Johnson's victory over white boxers for fear of causing more riots and violence. Not only did Jack Johnson whip white boxers, he committed the cardinal sin of marrying a white woman. In 1912, when interracial marriages were illegal in most states in America, Jack Johnson was convicted under the Mann Act of transporting his wife across state lines and sentenced to a year in prison. To avoid jail, Johnson fled the country, lived in Canada and Europe for 7 years. In 1920, he returned to America and served his sentence. White America had done in the courts what the great white hopes could not do in the ring: beat a Black American man down and give its pound of flesh. This proud Black American champion boxer that white America portrayed as an ignorant brute was in fact quite intelligent and also an inventor. In 1922, Jack Johnson, the first Black American heavyweight champion, patented improvements to wrench, patent number 1,413,121. Baseball. From the time the sport of baseball, the great American pastime, was developed nearly 100 years, Black American baseball players were not permitted to play in the professional leagues with or against white baseball players. The white Americans who controlled baseball leagues justified their racist discrimination against Black American boxers and Black American baseball players by penetrating the idea that baseball was a game of thinking and skill. They claimed that Black baseball players did not have the brains or skills to play in the white man's game of baseball. For nearly 100 years, white Christian Americans, the President of the United States, the senators and congressmen, ministers and priests, white people from virtually every station in life saw no problem with this blatant racist discrimination against Black Americans who wanted to play professional baseball. In fact, shortly after the Civil War, the National Association of Baseball Players passed a resolution that excluded, and I quote, any club which may be composed of one or more colored Black American players. Octavius Cato, one of the pioneers of Black American baseball, was murdered by a white man in 1871. In the early 1900s, many Black American baseball teams called themselves names such as the Cuban Giants and the Cuban Stars. These so-called Cuban teams were all composed of Black Americans. They called themselves Cuban to increase their acceptance by white Americans. To this day, white Americans tend to accept any nationality ahead of Black Americans. As a result of the financial success of Black American baseball leagues and with some political pressure to integrate baseball, Branch Rickey, owner, general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947, gave Jackie Robinson the opportunity to play in the white man's game of baseball. Jackie Robinson became the first Black American to play Major League Baseball, and we're glad he was there. The integration of baseball meant the end of Black baseball leagues as a commercial enterprise in the Black American community. Once in the game, Black baseball players began to excel. Now, over 72 years after white Americans permitted Black American baseball players to participate in the game, Black players hold many of the world records. Hank Aaron, who we recently lost, a Black American, took the home run record from the legendary Babe Ruth, who had hit 714 home runs in his career. Hank Aaron's lifetime home run record of 755 home runs was surpassed by Barry Bonds, also a Black American. Once Black baseball players got into the professional leagues, white Americans who controlled baseball then restricted the management of baseball teams to white men. White Americans in power, perpetuating racism, once more claimed that Black men did not have the intelligence or the skill to manage a baseball team. Think of that. Today, at the beginning of the 21st century, there are a few Black managers still fighting to overcome the extinct racism or distinct racism in the great American pastime. Football, very similar to baseball. White Americans who controlled football spent years keeping Black American athletes from playing. Even after football was finally integrated, for another 20 to 25 years, Black athletes were restricted to certain positions. The quarterback position, for example, was considered off limits to Black football players. Again, the reason given by the white Americans who controlled football was that Black players did not have the intellect to quarterback a football team. Although Black quarterbacks had been excelling from Black college football teams when these players came to the pros. They were encouraged to change their position to anything but a quarterback. White Americans in power resisted Black Americans performing in any capacity where they were required to tell white people what to do. This is a core resistance in America to white Americans taking orders from Black Americans. Having a Black American quarterback tell white American players what to do contradicted the paradigm of slavery. Golf, for nearly 150 years.
Okay, that's great read. Great read. We're gonna say the
Am I taking over somebody else's
board.
thing?
Yeah, you're getting excited.
Yeah, I done got into it. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm just going off. Excuse me.
We're gonna get your comments on what you read in just a moment. I'm gonna allow Dr. Harris to just kind of respond, and then allow your comments, which want to bubble forth, to just simmer just a little bit, like good gumbo. Dr. Harris, what would you like to say in response to Herman's eloquent read of the text?
Well, you know, Herman, as I read it, I am still amazed that it happened. You know, there's one passage that you read that really, it really struck home, and it really said that this took place. When this took place, the president, the senators, the congressmen, the preachers, the spiritual leaders all thought that this was all right, that it was okay to discriminate against Black people like that. And so it just speaks something about the character and the heart of America and Americans, that we could agree to that we could think that was all right. I mean, it's amazing that, you know, the idea of systemic racism. I find that the white community, we just talked about yesterday in North Carolina, the new legislation wants to take the word systemic out of the books and just say racism. And they want to take institutional racism, the word institution, out of the books. In other words, there's always this desire to minimize that concept. And when you see how deeply it was ingrained in education, in sports, I mean, a Black umpire couldn't even call a white player out, and we're talking up into the 70s, okay? And so just seeing how two things: one, that white Americans from the top to the bottom thought it was okay to do that. Two, the change always came not because of a moral um, a moral transformation, but it came about because of the dollars. When the white baseball players, baseball owners saw that the Black leagues were making money, okay, and they had to disguise themselves, the Cuban All-Stars, the Havana Bullets. I mean, anything other than say Black American, and you know, nobody in the stadium could speak Spanish. But it was necessary to do that. And so just to think that was, you know, condoned by everybody from the top to the bottom, but the transformation came about because of the money. When the white baseball owners saw the amount of money, the Black baseball players were filling stadiums. As a matter of fact, people wanted to go see the Black baseball players because those games were more exciting. You had Satchel Paige throwing a ball that could skip, hop, and bump.
Yeah, man.
You couldn't hit it with a 2x4, you know? And
Yeah.
so that change did not come about from a moral capitulation, but from follow the money. Back to
Absolutely.
you, Herman.
Yeah, well, the unique thing about systemic racism that goes back as far as we go back is that it is taught. It is not, you're not born with it. That means that somebody has to put that thought in your head that you are superior to another race of people based on color. And that has been the issue. And we're still fighting that today. And I think we got a long ways to go before we root it out. The roots are from here to China. I mean, they're very, very deep. And they get watered every time there's a white baby that's born. And especially back up in them woods, you know, where they don't get the culture, they don't see us, they're isolated. And then they come out like they did on January 6th and do their thing. And it's amazing to me that they can't see the right from the wrong. But as you stated, the systemic nature of it and the teaching of it is profound.
I'll add one more point. One of the things I've seen over the years is that any sport, any business, that they level the playing field. In other words, the white superiority could only be maintained by tipping the playing field in the favor of white players. And so many Black players played, I mean, did incredible things, but they were angry the whole time because they knew they were being paid less. They knew they were working harder to get what an average, ordinary white athlete could get. You had to be a superstar to get as much as an ordinary white athlete could get. But as I'm looking today, I saw something Sunday before last. I was sitting there and I was watching the rodeo. I don't know how my TV ended up on the rodeo. And what do you call it? Riding the bull riding. And lo and behold, the champion, the guy who won, was a black man riding a bull. And so it made me really see this racism works in the reverse too. As a black man, I never thought about black men riding the bull. But when you go back to the 1800s, it was the black men who were riding bulls and throwing them to the ground and tying them up. They literally invented the sport. And now you got a black man at the top of that. And I think you'll find that anything that happens, you'll basically find that if we're given a chance, we'll go to the top of the line no matter what the arena is.
What's also interesting as we bring Deborah in to read is the notion that even the very term cowboy came from African Americans. There was a play at the National Black Theater Festival, and it dealt with Bass Reeves. And Bass Reeves is the gentleman known in modern culture as Tonto and the Lone Ranger. Bass Reeves, formerly enslaved human being, who then became a warrant officer. The movie Django was made about Bass Reeves. So the more we tell these stories and uncover the facts, the more we realize that people of color have contributed to the very fabric of the nation, so much so the lawnmower invented by a black man that we don't even think of, the potato chips invented by a black man. But let's continue with our next reader, Mrs. Alt. Please join us and read with us, Miss Alt.
Yes, golf. For nearly 150 years, through the early 1960s, white Americans excluded Black Americans from playing professional golf. Of the more than 5,000 golf courses in the United States in 1930 and 1939, fewer than 20 were open to Black American golfers. It is ironic that the golf tee used today is virtually the same as the wooden golf tee invented and patented in 1899 by Dr. George F. Grant, a Black American golfer. As usual, white Americans considered golf to be a thinking man's game of skill that Black Americans could not play. Tiger Woods has forever destroyed this myth. Today, as we move further into the 21st century, there are still country clubs with golf courses that do not welcome Black American golfers. These country clubs give great excuses for not having Black American golfers playing in their courses. In reality, it is the operation of the paradigm of slavery. Often, the golf courses are the venues of choice for white businesses to discuss business deals. This automatically excludes Black businesses from the deal. The military. Surrection and discrimination against Black Americans existed in the United States military from the Civil Rights until 1948, when President Harry Truman issued an executive order abolishing segregation in the United States Armed Forces. Public schools in America. In 1954, the United States Supreme Court determined that separate but equal education for Black Americans is not equal and not just. It is unconstitutional under Brown versus the Board of Education. Once the Supreme Court had spoken, white school districts throughout the South fought the implementation of the legitimate order of the American's highest court. After many Black Americans sued the white public school system to force them to implement the desegregation order of the Supreme Court, the white people in control of the schools reluctantly complied. The dilemma that confronted Black Americans when the public schools were desegregated was that the school system was still under the control of the same white Americans who had been forced to integrate in the first place. The white Americans in power were still in charge. These These same white Americans were charged with overseeing the implementations of school desegregation plans. Their racist, slave-mastered consciousness was not changed by court orders to integrate public schools. To a major extent, the hearts, minds, spirit, and psyches of these white Americans in charge of school desegregation were basically the same as they had been during the period of segregation. The racist slave masters mentality was too deeply ingrained in the consciousness of the white Americans in charge and white Americans in general. As a result, the slave master consciousness permeated every aspect of school desegregation. Schools that have served Black American students prior to integration were generally shut down, abandoned, and often demolished. Black students were bused to schools that prior to desegregation had only served white students. The subtle implication was that the Black public schools were inferior and not worthy of having white students attend. That is the end of my section.
Dr. Harris, do you
Yes,
care to respond to that?
Yeah, let me chime in on that. Thank you so much, Deborah. I'm in Wilmington, North Carolina. And one of the things, I'm doing a panel tonight with the Board of Education and the group here. And one of the challenges is the fact that the interpretation of the desegregation order was in the context of racism. And so the orders were interpreted in a sense that white was right and good and Black was bad and inferior. And so when integration took place, the paradigm, and it's interesting, the same people that had to be forced to integrate were still in charge. They didn't bring in new people with a new mindset when the integration, when the court orders were, when it was litigated in court and the court gave a direct command to integrate, but the same people that had fought it were still in charge. And so there's a great, there's a proverb that says, a mind changed against its will is of the same opinion still. And so as integration took place, Black kids were, literally just disrespected, treated badly in so many ways. The culmination, for example, in the South was with the Wilmington 10. Wilmington, North Carolina is like the bellwether for the world, for the country. From 1898, when you had the only coup that actually took place on American soil. And then the Wilmington 10 was a situation where students were fighting the way that they were being treated in schools. And they brought in the National Guard, someone was killed. And these young men were literally sentenced to like 10 and 15 years. And eventually it was overturned. But this showed how deep, how deep that paradigm of racism was in the school system. From that time until now, there has been a consistent assault on the education system to undermine the impact and positive benefits of education for Black students. From the fact that Black schools are often underfunded, from the fact that there's no concerted effort to really bolster the teaching profession among Black students and among Black people. Doc, you were giving me a time signal, so let me kind of cut it off there.
Just wanted to hear all the voices. I think you're doing an excellent job of sharing with us your response to the reading, and you're adding on to the text based on some experiences you have. So I wanted to ask Herman Laverne Jones before I go to Ms. Alt, in your lifetime as well, could you speak to what Dr. Harris is talking about with relationship to integration, desegregation of schools, how this racism plays out in that, as well as in golf, because I think you have a connection to golf here in the state of North Carolina. Could you speak to that?
Yes, I grew up in North Carolina, but a little place called Garner, North Carolina, which is in the Research Triangle, Cary, Morrisville, Chapel Hill, Raleigh, Durham. And I integrated schools because my mom wanted to do it. I went to a little place called Garner Consolidated High School, and that's what the name of the black schools were because we went from first grade to 12th grade. So in 1967, I was changed schools, and for 2 years, it was me and three other students, black, who were up against 300 or 400 whites. And the very first day I got on the bus, which I was nerved out, and everybody was, you got cooties, you nasty, you ugly. A white girl spit in my mouth. I was trying to tell her, excuse me, and she just like, and bam, there it was. And I pushed her down, and I got sent to the principal's office. And when I told him about it, um, he didn't believe me, but I said, hey, it happened. That's what it was. Call my mama. And so they didn't want to see Dr. Georgia Jones come up in there, but Dr. Georgia Jones came down to the school and she says, it's got to stop. First day of school, let him be. And ultimately, um, they found out that I did have an intellect and that I was somebody of merit. And, I became captain of the football team and all of that because of being black. You're supposed to have superior skills, so we'll put you in there. And then I was president of the Beta Club and all those things, but it was rough. And in my senior year, I'd already been accepted at North Carolina State University and came to school one day, and all the black kids were upset because of the honor court. There were no blacks on the honor court. This was 1972. And I said, oh, well, because I was at that point, I had already transitioned in my mind. I'm moving forward. I'm getting out of this racist situation in Garner, and I'm going 6 miles up the street to North Carolina State University, another racist place. And I said, but at least I got admitted into college. And oddly enough, my mom wanted me to go to North Carolina Central University, and I had an opportunity potentially at Duke. And I chose NC State because it was closer to home and all of that. And in my senior year, I go into the auditorium, all the black kids are there. They were mad, they were cursing, they were fussing. And Yvonne Coleman said, Herman, you're the best speaker that we got. Get up and try to calm everybody down. So I got up in front of the folks and I said, okay, everybody, we about to graduate. Let's just calm down and get up out of here. What's the big deal? And they were all saying, Herm, you know what the big deal is, the racism, man. We need to have somebody on the honor court. And they did that because when they integrated the schools, the top 20 white kids had 4.0s, where the top black kid had a 3.8, but couldn't be on that honor court. So I said, well, let me just ask the principal. And here comes the principal in Blenson, white. He came down, he says, Herman, I knew you were leading this thing. I knew you were behind this. I'm expelling you from school. You ain't going to North Carolina State University because we're getting rid of you right now. And I said, I just walked into school and they asked me to talk. I'm trying to calm everybody down. And some black kids said, let's get him. Let's beat him up because he's in the auditorium. We just killed the principal. I said, no, let's not kill the principal. Let's what can we do, Blenson? And he was sweating by this time because he realized he was so deep down the aisle of the auditorium, he couldn't get out if we wanted to really whip his behind. And so he said, y'all need to go 50 feet out in front of the school. I said, okay, everybody, let's go 50 feet out. When we got to the door, the white football players, they was roaring at me because I played football too. Herman, why you with them niggas? You ought to be around here with us, man. I didn't know you was like that, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Number one, you about to start a race riot right here. Johnny Johnson, that was his name. I said, listen, let us go 50 feet out. Counted 50 feet out, and that was at the flagpole, the American flagpole. So technically, we were in a good position. By this time, newspapers were coming, the radio station, the TV station, they all showed up, and we did the protest. And the end of the story is we got what we wanted at the end of the day. I got put on a statewide council as a senior, and we talked it through, and they gave us 4 out of the 20 could be on, and those other four white kids who had 4.0s had to capitulate to 3.8, 3.7, 3.6, so that the black could have some
To be
representation.
represented. Yeah,
Exactly.
and
So
that
that's go ahead.
listening to you, that's a very deep telling of life in the 70s as an African American in a higher education institution. And that's a perfect bridge for Miss Alt, because here she is at a predominantly Caucasian institution as well. Um, could you just respond to what you've read in the text yourself, Deborah, as well as what you've heard Mr. Herman Laverne Jones say about his experience, and how, if at all, that relates to your experience at school?
Yeah, I can respond. So I feel like in the text, especially when it's talking about like integration, and having different people from, well, being able to have Black students attend school and also attend schools that are well resourced. I just think about how there are a lot of misconceptions around how in higher education, having a student of color being able to access a university, how people feel like that is like all that universities need to do in order to make sure that like students of color are being serviced well. For instance, at my school, like it's one thing I'm a part of this program called Posse, which brings 10 students from a certain city to a university. And so there's, in my Posse, we're all people of color. And oftentimes in our posses, they're people of color, but it is a merit-based scholarship. But either way, our school prior to having Posse didn't really have any students of color at our school. And we also have a program called the Martin Luther King Transitional Year Program, which we call MLK TYP. And this is another area where a lot of students of color enter our university. And outside of that, there might be maybe 1% or 2% of like other students of color are generally admitted to the school. But even when you're looking at those statistics around like how are people of color getting to our school, like you're seeing that the general admission requirements are not really allowing for students of color to have access to a predominantly white institution that I attend. And so that's one area where I see that there's like a lot of tension. And in addition, I feel that even at our school, when we are in our classes and we're being able to have access to our professors and things like that, that certain students have like the ability to navigate the institution in a way that like you might not always know, especially when you're the first person in your family to go to college. And so I think that Jean Onion, who's a researcher, an education researcher, she talks about the hidden curriculum in schools, where like based on the school you go to, there's hidden curriculums that teach you how to navigate a society and how to navigate an institution to get what you want. And so at our school, what I face now is a more covert and more like a covert inequities at our school, where it's not like overtly that you can't get access to resources, but covertly, if you're not on a certain listserv, you probably don't know what grants are going to be offered in order for you to pursue a free, like a summer internship that's really interesting to you but doesn't pay you. So then you either have to choose between getting a job over the summer or like getting an unpaid internship. And so like navigating those resources in order to get what you want is like where students of color at my school like find challenge, because you really have to know how to navigate the university, but it's not something that's taught. So I think right now we're in a place that there is like you can access the university or you can access education, but like being able to access the full experience is another challenge that I now face when at my school, and that's like what I'm working towards breaking down as I work at my school.
Wow, that Deborah, that's very interesting, and You got to be on the inside. You know, we often say, Herman, we always say, you got to be at the table. Well, you got to at least be in the room, you know. And I was listening, the list servers we used to call it the Rolodex. You know, if you're not in the right person's Rolodex, then you're never going to know what's going on. And so information is so critical, so critical. Herman, I saw you raise your hand. You wanted to share?
Yeah, I can remember, and I know Dennis can relate to this somewhat. We both went to North Carolina State University, right?
Yes,
And I got my undergrad there, and he got, what did you get there? Your
the
undergrad?
same undergrad.
Your
Yes.
undergrad as well. And we were talking, and it was interesting that I was there probably 2 decades or a decade or so before you were, and we traveled some of the exact same ground. And when Deborah was talking, it just reminded me about these resources. I can feel you, Deborah, because I remember at NC State, it was such a large institution. When I was there, it was like 160 blacks and 22,000 whites. And I said, Mom, you didn't got me on this track of being around these white children. I'll deal with it. But anyway, I can remember walking around the campus, and it was so enormous. Sometimes I felt this duality of the privilege of going to this type of institution, but I also felt lost a lot of the times because I would see these white people and Chinese people and other cultures and da 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 da, and they seem to be progressing along. And I knew in my own mind, I'm a little bit lost. I don't know which one of these buildings to really go in to access what I really would want and desire to have because the institution is so big. So you go into a spot and you see all the notebooks, all the books, you see kids relating, and I'm going like, I'm black. How do I penetrate that? How do I get to that? And if it wasn't for Dr. Witherspoon and some of the other folks that were on the campus to say, come here, brother, come here. I see you turning in circles like nothing but the city, I mean, and all of a sudden, he said, listen, calm down, number one. I know who your mama is. Now you go talk to your mama. I said, oh, I forgot all about talking to my mom. My mama got her doctorate from North Carolina State University. And so I said, oh, okay, talk to mama. So mama said, go in this direction, go in that direction. Then they said, well, talk to these other black people here. I said, I didn't know that I could actually talk to those other black instructors, black administrators, and they were on the inside who helped pull me to the inside. Okay. So by the time I finished North Carolina State University, I started my own not-for-profit theater company in 1975. They gave me a building. It was the print shop. They gave me a building to do my plays in. I had gotten into the world of the theater, which ultimately projected me to UNC Chapel Hill, where I got my master's. And so in North Carolina. And so I understand and feel you, Deborah. It is hard when you got so many issues at these white institutions and you got a few friends, and how do you get to the resources like you hear your white counterparts they got? They getting $15,000 from this and a grant over here for that, and you go like, can I get some of that? And then if you go and try, sometimes the person that you have to interface with, the first person that's sitting there at the desk says, "Oh, we don't have any more of those." And then you find out later they did have more of that. They just in the business of turning dark skinned people away.
Way. And what's interesting is, as the author, Dr. Harris, has written a book about sports, it's the fact that there was this underground railroad of support. There's been a movie made, for example, about Jackie Robinson, and he played in the Negro Leagues. And at one point he said, well, no, I like it down here. They're like, no, you go ahead. You're going to make a way for others. And old school guys like Satchel Paige had that wisdom to encourage him. And when I think of, a little more about Deborah, is she has an older sister who went to Spelman. She has a mother that went to Hunter College in New York. And so she comes from a family of education, yet her in Brandeis, very rarefied academic air, like Columbia, where Dr. Harris went, and she's navigating this terrain. Could you just speak one more time, if you would, Deborah, on why you decided to launch an organization and initiative in these 25 demands in the way that you and your colleagues did at Brandeis?
Yeah, so to talk a little bit about what I'm doing on campus now, my friend Sonali Anderson and myself over the summer, and it was really in response to the police brutality which took the lives of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless others, that really inspired us to make a change. So our school has a long history of protest, and it's really started with Angela Davis, who led a protest that is on our campus called Ford Hall, and there have been several iterations of Ford Hall at our school. And Ford Hall was the administrative building that's located at Brandeis. And a few years ago, in 2019, there was another iteration of Ford Hall, which students called Still Concerned 2019. But something that me and my friend recognized was that all of the Ford Hall movements were in response to police brutality, but many of them didn't really have the momentum they needed in order to make the changes that they hoped to see. For instance, in the initial Ford Hall, they wanted to make sure that, I think by like 4 years from the time it happened, that there was like 5% of students of color on our campus, but only last year were we able to meet 5%. And the first Ford Hall was in 1964, I believe. Wow. So it's been a long time. And we finally now have 5% students of color on our campus. And so we really wanted to do something differently than they had done in the past, because in the past they did a lot of protests and then they gave a list of demands to administration and they said, we want you to do these demands by an X amount of time. But what we noticed was that students were, or the administration would interpret the way that students said they wanted to see something in a different way than how students intended it to be. And so we were seeing changes, but not in the way that we wanted to. So my friend and I were like, okay, well, we need to work with the administration in order to make the changes that we hope to see, because if we don't, they're going to misinterpret what we're saying and we're going to have the same problems over and over. And also, like, there's reiterations of Ford Hall because it needs to be a consistent effort rather than a one-time thing whenever something arises. And so, yeah, we made something that's now called the Black Action Plan. And over the summer, we hosted a Zoom call that had over 100 participants. And they basically shared with us their concerns about various departments on our campus. And from there, we were able to make a list of demands to be able to say, okay, this is how we can solve the concerns of the students. And so after that, we utilized social media to gain over 1,000 followers in 1 week. And then after we did that, we asked our followers to conduct phone banking with us. Since it was COVID-19, we didn't want to do a real protest because, like, we didn't want to put anyone's health at risk. So we phone banked and we called administration we called administration for 2 weeks every 5 minutes. We called every administrative department every 5 minutes for 2 weeks. And so, like, by the third day, they were like, are you calling in regards to the Black Action Plan? And they're right. Yeah. And then we gave them scripts and stuff like that. So within 2 weeks, like halfway through the first week, we got a invitation to have a 2-hour meeting with the president of Brandeis and the top administrators of Brandeis to talk about the Black Action Plan and what we hope to see and why we're protesting and stuff like that. And since then, we were hired to the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to continue to do the Black Action Plan. And one of our accomplishments that we've been able to, then my partner became a member of the Board of Trustees and I became an honorary member of the Board of Trustees. And then I became a member of the Alumni Board so that we could make sure we were influencing. Oh yeah, do you have questions?
Oh yeah, listen, this is exactly what the movement of the 60s was about, where Dr. King was talking about. He says we got to be inventive and come up with ways to protest in a non-violent way, and
Yes.
wearing that telephone out, that's my term,
That's
wearing,
brilliant.
I
That's
mean, to the
brilliant.
white meat. Y'all was on them to the white meat every 5 minutes. Let's do this. Yeah, yeah. And all of a sudden they say, well, wait a minute, we got to stop this madness that is really a concern from these students, because how can we do anything to them for making a telephone call?
That's
Huh?
right.
Okay, we
They're
can't
paying
do anything.
tuition.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, whoever came up with the telephone call every 5 minutes, I'm gonna use that to some people I know right now. They about to get a telephone call every 5 minutes, because if that can move that, see, you move a mountain when you don't pick up a sword, a baseball bat, a gun, a knife, throw a Molotov cocktail. Don't do that. Come up with inventive ways to keep the non-violent movement going forward, so that you can tear them walls down with love and respect. See, that's the part that they can't deal with, is
That's
when
right.
we start loving and respecting on them and saying, we gonna talk your same talk, Mr. Brandeis, and we gonna sit on your board, Mr. Trustee, and we gonna do this and that and the third, and we gonna come in here and we gonna know how to speak the king,
Okay.
but we
Yes.
want what we want when we want it.
Yeah.
Okay, and so
And
that's what
like,
y'all are doing. And I know Dr. Harris and Dr. Rogers, y'all have been so wonderful, and I'm about to shut up.
you've done a wonderful job. Um, uh, Deborah, if you'd like to say one more thing before we turn it over to Dr. Harris and he closes us out for today. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us? You've done such a wonderful job.
Mm.
I guess the last thing that I can share is like one of the cool things that we've been able to do through the Black Action Plan. So
Okay.
at our school, students used to, if you were locked out of your dorm at the evening time, police officers who were armed would come to unlock your door. And a lot of students didn't like that because it's just like ridiculous. Why are armed police officers unlocking your door? And so we were able to work with the university to take away that responsibility from police, and we're continuing to like take away responsibilities from our police so that we can show the university that eventually like there's no need to have police on our campus. So just taking it one day at a time to hope to make the changes that we want to see.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. I
Wow.
mean, these readers are awesome.
Young
They
lady,
have their stories that connect directly to the text. Anything you like to share before you close us out for today?
I tell you, Deborah, as I was listening to you, I wanted to shout, you know. And you said something. I worked for Reverend Ike, the great minister. And Reverend Ike, he had a watchword, and he said, "Don't bring me a problem without a solution." And so when you were saying you all brought demands, but you also brought solutions to those demands, you know, I think that's a whole new paradigm, and I thank you so much for that. It's because of the young people that this transformation is going to take place. When I was in college, there were 5 Blacks out of about 2,000. Well, in my class, 5 out of 725. And by the end of the first year, there was only 2 of us. So we couldn't even get together to play a card game. And one of the things that we felt that was very interesting, and I see you all have basically solved that. One of the things that I see you, my friend.
wait a minute, Deborah, you write that down, darling. I want to talk to you. You my type of children. I love children like you. I'm so
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things that as a Black student in a white school, it seemed like every other group had a group. We had the International House for all the international students. You had the Hispanic Club. You had the Jewish group. And every time the Black group tried to come together, it was always a problem. And it was, and I think it's a carryover of that slave paradigm. You know, if 2 or more Black men got together in the Old South, that was grounds to get yourself killed. As a slave, you talk to 2 or 3 slaves at one time, you're going to get killed. And I think that behavior has come over into our existence. And so in the days that I attended the white schools, we felt totally alienated because there was not enough of us to form a group. And what is happening now in this whole, the new movement, the post-George Floyd movement, is that white kids and black kids are coming together for a common purpose. In the 60s in my school, that wasn't happening. And so you had that sense of isolation. And I love it that you all have really done great strides towards resolving that and helping make education a great benefit and blossom for everybody.
Excellent. And everyone, that we're going to have to leave it there for today. We look forward to being with you again tomorrow at 1 p.m. And we will continue the big read of solving the race issue in America, such that we are officially concluded with the big read. If the conversation continues, it's out of enthusiasm, but we are officially done with the big read at this time.